Good afternoon, children. Today I am wearing my favourite festival hat. It's actually a rainbow hat, which is quite good at the moment because people have been painting rainbows and putting them in their windows, haven't they? But when I used to go to pop festivals, to music festivals, I used to put this hat on and sit in a field, and if it rained it would keep me dry, and if the sun shone too much it would keep me cool. So there we are, that is my festival hat. And I've got my favourite apple on, which is here, which I think you all like. So today I've had a special request. I've been talking to little Sylvie Kane and she asked for Peter Rabbit. And I have a little tiny collection of Peter Rabbit books here. And they're so small. But there's 4 books in here, but there is one called The Tale of Peter Rabbit. So today we will have The Tale of Peter Rabbit. So I think that our special guest should be our favourite little bunny. There he is, in his carrot. You're going to be good and sit nice and still like the children? Yes, he said he is. So he's going to sit there with Big Rabbit and Lamb Chop, and I will read the story, which is very tiny. So, are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. So, there's a picture of Peter Rabbit in bed with his mummy looking after him. Let's see what happens. Once upon a time there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. There we are. Now, my dears, said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. That must be terrible. So there was only Mrs. Rabbit and the 4 rabbits, wasn't there? Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out. Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of bread and 5 currant buns. Wasn't she a lovely mummy? Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. There we are. And I was just looking in my garden today, and the fruit bushes are starting to blossom. They've got little flowers on them and tiny, weeny little tiny currants and josterberries, and soon, if the sun keeps coming out, they will get bigger and bigger, and then be able to pick them and make jam. Maybe, if we're very, very lucky, you can come and visit and pick some with me. Anyway, Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. Wasn't he bad? That's terrible. You'd think he would be scared. First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes, and he sat there with Mr. Robin on the spade. And then, feeling rather sick because his tummy was full, he went to look for some parsley, because parsley is very good at stopping you from feeling sick. But round the end of the cucumber frame, who should he meet but Mr. McGregor? There's Mr. McGregor. Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened, and so he should have been. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately got caught in a gooseberry net by his large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons and quite new. There he is, stuck in the net. Silly Peter. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. There. Getting away. And he rushed into the tool shed and jumped into the watering can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Silly Peter. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed. Achoo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time, and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter, so he went back to his work. There, wasn't Peter lucky? Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright. He had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that watering can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit like him to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. You see that little mouse? Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his watering cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. There she is, looking at the goldfish. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe, scritch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but presently nothing happened, and he came out and climbed on a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing that he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. There he is, looking out at Mr. McGregor. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of Peter, but he didn't care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside of the garden. There he is, just going underneath the gate. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the birds. Poor Peter's jacket. There's a scarecrow. Peter never stopped running or looking behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of his rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I am very sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoon to be blah, 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 blah. 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper because they had been good, and poor Peter had to go to bed without any supper and just chamomile tea, and that's the end. There they are. So that just shows you that you must do as your mum tells you and not go in Mr. McGregor's garden. There we are. That was a very nice story, wasn't it? So maybe we'll go back to a Peter Rabbit story again one day. But for now, we're going to say goodbye. Put him away with the other books. Keep him safe because these little books used to belong to Grandpa's little girl, Claire, and she's a big girl now, but they're very precious. So, there we are. Say bye-bye, Rabbit. Bye-bye. Say goodbye, Lamb Chop. Bye-bye. Say goodbye, Rabbit. Bye. And I will play you out with a little tune. Doodly-doo. Goodbye.